Hello. Wait, I'm going to change to a slightly more professional background. How are you, Marcus?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm good. I see Dia on the document, but not in our room. Where'd she go? Did you have a good weekend?
I did. My wife's family's birthdays are all compressed within like a month span of time, and there are 8 of them. Not quite a whole month for all of them. It's about 6 birthdays within a month. And so we were back for a week ago, and then we took the week back home here, and then we took this past weekend with them again and celebrated 2 birthdays. So yeah.
Let's just keep partying. It's a party time.
Exactly.
Good. Christine and Eric and I were just on another call, so it's all Zoom all day.
So everyone pops in.
Yes, no, that's good, right? It's
like a transporter room. It's perfect.
Yes.
I think I like Katie's room, but she's not there, so.
It was like it's a real room, not a virtual room.
I know.
It reminds me of Twin Peaks, though. I don't know, maybe the floor, if it was on the ceiling. I'm a little in a weird, yeah, exactly.
Okay. And she can't defend herself right now because she's still connecting on audio. I see Dia in the document. I tried to update as much as possible. So we'll give everybody like another minute or two. I'm wondering if Eric or Katie have a popcorn question in mind. So just to prepare your popcorn question.
Katie, come on, Katie. I'm still bringing up the.
Oh, there she is. All right, Katie, we might put you on the spot here. Yeah, see, Katie, you've arrived. You're still connecting on audio, but we may tag you to pick the popcorn question, just so you know. No pressure. But
oh, it looks like you are connected. Great.
It's because Eric doesn't want to ask the popcorn question.
Heavens no.
So, can you hear us, Katie?
I can hear you.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
All right. We could use
We can hear you as well.
Yes.
Good.
We could use the dare say thing. Oh, so we'll talk about the rules of, were we going to talk about rules of engagement too?
Let's see, let's see. I think your was it an email or a Slack thing, Cecilia? I think it was great, and so great that I don't even remember it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
no, I know it connects with what we were, kind of the overall or some of the themes that we've got. Yeah.
Okay, so with that in mind, Katie, do you have a popcorn question? Otherwise, I will make one up.
No.
Okay, all right.
Make one up.
I will. I'm going to share the agenda again. This call is obviously being recorded.
I've got a great popcorn question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, inspiration.
Well, let me put it this way. It could be a terrible popcorn question, but we've got a small group, so consider this the first pancake or an experiment. Are you ready for me to ask that question?
Yes.
All right. So what is your favorite popcorn break the ice question that you've received in these many calls?
You expect us to remember?
Well, I'll just say we just did a thing about your what is your theme song for today or something, and I hated that. So I don't have an answer that's ready to go, but I don't know. I thought that would be interesting to see if there's something that brings it out. Or we can punt, or Cecilia can go with something that she had that was ready to go.
think it depends on the purpose of the check-in. If it's just like a getting to know you thing, or if it's like trying to like ignite insight into this group's conversation. So a little more primer, Eric, for the meta question.
A little more primer for the meta question. So I'll say that I think these popcorn questions, depending on which goal you're part of and depending on who's running them, they have sort of two different things that I think, sometimes on the spectrum, and these are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes it's just getting to know each other as people. And I think it's been really important, and it's something that I don't know if Forward Cities adopted this because of what's happening with ESHIP and others, but we always, pretty much almost every meeting we've got has got some kind of a popcorn, get to know you, get a feel for folks kind of question. So I think that piece where you get to know more of the person than just work. We're not just work. Now, some of the popcorn questions that I've been part of, and sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't, are kind of worky, but it's trying to bring out some different aspect of what you find, what is it that motivates you about the work. So I think I think it's helpful, but I think you need to have both of those thoughts in mind. The other thing I'll mention right now is that a different thing we do a lot of with Forward Cities is we kind of want to know right now, because there's so much going on in the world, we want to know where people are. We're coming to this, like, sometimes there's trauma, sometimes there's other stuff going on, and we don't want people to have to shut off that part of their world and I'm totally in work mode right now, because that's unfair. Anyway, so yes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for adding another word to the English language. Worky. It's kind of worky as an adjective added to the English language. I'd never heard that before.
Oh boy. Well, I don't know if I'm being. I'll thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Everybody can't just invent a word, so congratulations.
So, Katie, do you have an answer to what is your favorite popcorn question then?
I can't.
And maybe just share with. Okay, so I'll give you.
I think maybe one of my favorite ones is it was a very open questions like how are you, or where are you today, or something like that. Something very general. It's like, let me take your temperature kind of question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that definitely helps set the tone of the call or the awareness. Absolutely. I think when I share with ESHIP champions, the reason we do popcorn questions is really about building community, and we ask questions about you because the relationship is with you and not the job, right? Because for Eric's changed roles in during the time that I've known him in the course of these calls. I've changed roles in the course of these calls. So it's not particularly about that. So that's great. So I will fill in my favorite popcorn, or a memorable popcorn question, which was really fascinating to find out. It was like such a lighthearted question, but it was, how do you like your popcorn? And we came up with, and there was like a dozen people on the call, and we came up with as many different responses to that. So now I have like different ways of enjoying popcorn that I never thought about before. But it was really, and people would talk about that. So that was just a very, it was sometimes you just need a lighthearted question just to get some knowledge of who you are. So in that aspect, I will call on Christine. Christine, what's your favorite popcorn question?
Yeah, I really appreciate the context setting, because I think that it's so important to be able to present how people are arriving if it's very timely in this moment. And I would say, like, I think a lot of us have touched upon those. So I can share, like, in my last company, we would always do different segments because we were a virtual team on like show your crib, or like hot seat or whatever. So I think it's always really fun to like throw really obscure questions, or like, like what is like your like favorite childhood memory, or like what has informed you of who you are, or whatever it is that you like, it's in the moment, but you actually know the answer already. So it's not like you have to scramble like today's question, Eric. I was kind of like, a song in this moment. I have no idea. But I think being able to ask people personal questions about like who they are, that they love to share, but they don't always get invited to share, I think are really valuable check-in questions, because that's like we talked about this before, I think on other calls, but the power of an invitation is so incredible in getting to know people. And so sometimes just being able to be like, share a couple sentences about one of your favorite childhood memories, like allow someone to reminisce about that, but also gets some insight into like who that person is, like why they're that way or whatever. So I really appreciate the more obscure, fun, personal questions. That's just like an invitation for people to share. So yeah. I will popcorn to Miss Dia.
Thank you. I was thinking about this. There's been so many good ones. And honestly, these have always been kind of a relief for me, because these are like the only meetings where I can actually kind of relax a little bit. But I think the question was, what was the most interesting thing we've been invited to? And it was just a really fun discussion, and it just explored like several different things. So I think that was a really, really good one. Marcus, have you gone yet?
I have not. And I was actually going to say the same question. I really enjoyed that one. I thought that was, and I think it also exposed a lot of really interesting stuff about individuals that, got past the surface level, which is really cool. But it also made you think. You had to think about the value of invitation. So it was kind of a twofer, because it was relevant to the topic at hand. But it got your mind thinking in a different space, which I like those. It's not just a like, oh, what did you have for lunch today? It's like, well, I don't have to put my mind in a different space. Obviously it tells something about me, but maybe not that much, especially if I didn't need anything. So I think those questions are valuable in that way. And I'll hop over to CJ, because I think he just hopped on, so no one's gotten him yet.
Let's just ambush him.
I have no idea what we're talking about. What's the question? What was the question?
Your favorite like pop. So knowing that check-ins are your favorite part of every call, CJ, we're really curious as to your favorite popcorn question. So we've shared kind of like, how are you arriving, or more personal questions or things. Do you have a favorite question?
That's been asked already?
That is a question. It's a little bit of a meta question.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. My favorite popcorn question.
Yep, like your favorite check-in question, like when we have these calls and we open these calls.
Right. In other words, you're asking me the favorite one that we've been asked before?
Or that you have, or that you would like to ask, or whatever. Just it's an open question.
That I'd like to ask. I like to ask people, what would you say to a fairly young person, what the secret of your success is?
Nice. That's a really nice one.
So is anybody going to answer that?
I think we're taking cues for future calls. So now we're just building our list.
Okay.
And now we've got one to add to the list. So did everyone go? Eric, I feel like
I've intentionally skipped myself. I don't have I really like the invitation one. The one that I was, and it's, I don't know, I'll just share it, which was, what skill do you wish you'd learned before this moment? What skill do you wish you'd already developed so that you could be better prepared to be where you need to be today? Because that was like, I mean, it does kind of focus on maybe some weaknesses, but it also kind of brings out some of the different, where folks think their weaknesses are, or kind of where they want to go sort of professionally. So I kind of like that aspect of it too.
That's an awesome question, Eric. I don't even see that as a weakness question. I see that more as like a question of like, in this moment, like, what is the thing that you wish you could like use in this time? Like, I think that's a really powerful question, because anyways, I'm a big reframer. That's an awesome question.
that's great. I think everybody has had an opportunity to speak. So talking about, I'll tell you, in the discussions that we had in preparing for the call, some of the conversations that the ESHIP champions have had in the past month or so around, I'm trying to pull up the notes. So around community, one of the things is about bringing people into the community, onboarding or level setting, and all those things that need to happen. So I know a couple of people on this call in particular are really mindful about what that looks like. And so the idea of, now we talked about convening when Callie was on the call. So what the design of the ESHIP Summit and the things, the elements that go into bringing people together are, and Callie had shared with us how much they really think about, like, Peter Block's mindfulness and convening. And then last month we talked about the invitation, because as Peter Block pointed out, the idea, how you frame the invitation really does affect how people come together. And the conversations around, the discussions around ESHIP champions are focusing on what we can do from now until the upcoming summit, is really about how to invite people into this work. And we've touched on things like the need for standardization as far as an invitation or a package, connecting with people regionally and locally, and then there's like how to involve people in the different communities like Facebook or Slack or whatever to catalyze them and get them more engaged. So I want to point out, and we shared this in the beginning of the call, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie, Dia, and Eric to kind of facilitate. So on the ESHIP dashboard, what we have at the bottom left part of the dashboard are something we call the rules of engagement, and I'll throw them also in the chat. And the rules of engagement are something that were kind of put together in the beginning of the 2017, it's actually in the 2017 ESHIP Summit Playbook as you attended. And it was the foundation and the people that convene the conference, their way of inviting people to show up, like setting together some kind of framework or approach or mindset. Like, that's the framing of the invitation, is when you come, here are the ways that we're hoping that people engage. Break rules and dream, open doors, listen, experiment, iterate, design for the whole system, take our work seriously, but not personally, know that done is better than perfect, define and own our next steps, and have more fun together, pay it forward. They're pretty open. Sometimes putting together guardrails like that makes it challenging. So my question, to kind of open it up and turn it over for people to facilitate, is when you think about creating this collaborative culture, what should we think about or be mindful of in where we set the guardrails and what we can do? And hopefully Christine and I can help keep some notes around this so that all of you can engage in this conversation. But guardrails as a collaborator tool, the mindset that you have coming in. So I will turn it over to you.
So ask me that question. Where should we set the guardrails?
Are guardrails necessary,
Okay, are
in your
guardrails
opinion?
necessary?
And if they are, what do you want to include and what don't you want included? Let's say in relation to this particular work, right? ESHIP Summit, ESHIP goals, ecosystem building, whatever part of that you want to address.
I think we always have to have something to navigate by, and so I like having the guardrails. And because it just gives you a place to start. Sometimes we set the guardrails and we set them wrong, but we don't know that at the time. But as you go operating within the guardrails, that's when you learn whether or not the guardrails are there to help you or to constrain you. But I think we always have to have something to navigate by, and that's what the guardrails do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think I always suggest that there be some, and I think there's a couple different elements to that that are helpful. And I don't know, maybe I'm just feeling really meta on this call, but I think there's sort of an agreement that you have when you get into a space. Well, there can be an agreement that you have when you get into a space, if you've been invited in there. And I think the more that people are intentional about joining that space and participating, the more likely they are to actively participate and also play by the rules and be useful. So that's one reason why, as a facilitator or whatever, I usually like to have some guardrails or some rules. One thing that I think is important is, I think in order to have that be a valid agreement, there needs to be the offer of, does anybody have anything that needs to be changed here or added or something along those lines? Because if the group of people who's participating doesn't have a chance to weigh in, then they haven't purchased it. They haven't bought or committed to it. So I think that's a really important element when we have those, is that there's a chance for folks to put their own polish on it or make it theirs.
I also think it's really relevant because some of us have been working on the invitation to specifically the ESHIP summit, but when we draw that correlation as well as to who the invitation is coming from, but also who do we invite? Do we have like a example kind of person who we think should be part of that delegation model? So I think these standards will be helpful as we kind of translate it to those invitations as well.
I think one thing about just creating buy-in and setting those boundaries is those boundaries will look different depending on, kind of like Dee was saying, like who that person is, but also, people who come to the conference, especially like at the digital conference, may not need as much buy-in to the process and everything we're doing in the mindset as people who are actively participating in goal creation or something like that. Like if you're trying to create a revival, people don't need to be converted to your religion before they come to your revival. Like the point of the revival is to get people over your bridge, right? So like in the same way, I think to be mindful of what we're expecting of people coming to learn, especially when it's a place of learning versus a place of engaging and making change. I think that mindfulness, I think, is important.
CJ, any ideas, thoughts?
For rules of engagement, I look at them and I say, well, they're nice. It's just that, most professionals who engage in a community like this, already should have some basic rules of engagement. If they have to be told a lot of these things, maybe they don't belong here in the first place. So, I look at them and say, well, they're nice, but, we sort of know that to start with, be respectful and be practical and that sort of thing. It's nice to have them up there. But I also think that if there's somebody in this group or people in the group that don't know basic rules of engagement for any kind of collaborative group, well, maybe they don't belong here just yet.
I think that, part of that refers to, I think, sort of that different levels of experience that was mentioned before, or buy-in, because I know with some of the sort of community groups that I'm part of right now, there are people who've, done this dozens of times. They've been part of that strategic plan. There's other people who have not actively been involved in that. And our role is actually to bring those folks into a conversation about these things. So we don't want them to feel like, they're joining some party late. They haven't been part of this, or they feel like, they don't feel like they don't feel like it's an environment that's really welcoming them. So that's one reason why having that set for everyone at the same time has been helpful for us.
I think it's a really,
it's also a time of learning for people who, just like Eric said, haven't already been drinking the Kool-Aid for a long time. It's an opportunity for them to really learn. My mother was a minister, and so we belong to a lot of different churches. And the most successful churches were the ones who were able to bring people in fresh to the concepts and help them understand and embrace the concepts. The ones that were least successful are the ones who only wanted people who were already saved and sanctified and knew everything and read the Bible every day, because they had just narrowed their market so much and they didn't have much they could learn from each other. So I think we do have to have a way for people to come in and embrace and learn. And for those of us who've been drinking the Kool-Aid, sometimes it's good to have a little refresher so that we don't get lazy.
I'm not sure if I should be concerned or if I actually really, really like your analogy of drinking the Kool-Aid.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that comparison. Well, she wasn't like him.
I believe it.
Yeah, because I'm still alive.
I know. Christine, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I was going to share, this is like a really interesting group makeup for this call, because I would say there are 3 ESHIP champions and 2 folks who are newer to these calls and this work. And so I think when I think about collaborative culture, kind of echoing a lot of what's been shared on this call, what I have learned from my previous work in organizational culture, which is different, but I think there's some things that can be applied in this, is with these rules of engagement, I think like CJ mentioned, they sound really good. Like they're almost like good kind of like rally flags, like things that sound really marketable. And for me, when you actually get into a community, I'm really curious how these things actually show up. And so having examples of what it looks like to open doors and listen, maybe Katie can have some good examples of that, or having examples of having more fun together, and Eric can have some examples of that, and pay it forward, and Dia can have some examples, and even being able to show like people who are new, like this might be something that might look like your rules of engagement as a newer comer. And then as someone who's been more experienced, this is how we show up. But there's a whole spectrum, there's no judgment, but just being able to share with people how we celebrate each other and how we want to engage with each other and what the environment is that we want, because that's going to be conducive to our work together. But also, like Eric kind of prompted with our pop-in, our like popcorn question, it's kind of like how we also really just appreciate each other as whole humans in this work together. And so I think if there's a way for us to, I don't know if this is part of what you're asking, Cecilia, what your prompt is, but, and I've been using this in many calls, but like being able to show kind of like a matrix of how people can, have engaged and how we can celebrate them, I think could be a really cool way for us to add on and build on these rules of engagement.
So when, go ahead, Marcus.
Okay. I was just gonna say something also that, like, I guess defining where this all sits is like, I look at principles or values as something that's like very fundamental. And so I can not require you, but basically if you're engaging with my group of people, I can say, okay, well, I need you to be at least operating at this level of values of like, you're going to be honest and different stuff like that. Very, very core level of values. And then you have like requirements or like roles to take work to be done. And then I guess my question is like, where does rules of engagement fit in that? Is it very, very, very basic leaning towards values, or is it more like, you have to learn more before you can really do these things? And like looking at our rules of engagement, they seem pretty basic. They seem further towards values. But I feel like maybe there's a spectrum there. And so if it leans towards values, maybe there's nothing wrong with just saying, okay, well, values should be something that are widely enough held that there's not really any, it's not crazy to say, oh, well, you're just going to, if you're going to be participating with this, you're going to follow our values. I don't think that's necessarily all that wrong. It just depends on what I guess, how complex those values are, maybe.
So I think the interesting thing is that we call them rules of engagement. And when you outline it as a rule, there seems to be like this is good, this is bad, there's punishment, there's, non-conforming. So I think rules that's a challenging notion to begin with. I know that in my experience, the convenings that I've been part of, we call them norms. This is the stance in which you come into the community, right? So these norms are what we set up as this is what the average behavior should be. And then when we've done it with youth groups, the kids that have been around for a while, like they know the drill and they'll start rambling off Vegas rules and platinum rule and this and that. And so step up, step back. I mean, there's a whole bunch of rules that just kind of come into the conversation quickly because it's things that they've not only they're familiar with because it was modeled previously, but they're also something that they accepted and kind of owned as their own. So every year at youth group, we would have a new time that we get together in the beginning of the session and we start creating these norms together. And then everybody signs them as part of this is, does anybody have anything to say about these? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Now is the time to voice them. And then if it's not, then, and everybody is like good on that, then we all sign them, right? So that's our covenant, our promise to each other that we're going to accept these as the mode of behavior of which we come to our convening. The challenge that I found with things as like, oh, well, here's like stuff that people already should know is that what happens is you're usually conforming to an existing culture. And when you step into a community and there's an assumption that you're going to behave in a certain way, it's you having to conform or assimilate to the majority of the culture, good, bad, or indifferent, right? Because the people that came before you set those guidelines, rules, and norms together. You didn't necessarily have a voice in them, nor is there possibility of dissent or a challenge or questions, right? And what we've done with setting these up is, yes, there are good stakes in the ground, so we have somewhere to start, as Katie said. Here's an opportunity that we can start. I think what the question is then, so how often do we check them? Do we ever question them? Do we just assume that this is the way that it should be? Because the majority of the community has said, yeah, I'm good with that. So as Christine said with the pledge, like right now, we're working on what a vision, a mission, values of the field are. It's very hard to create all of those shared visions for an entire field of people, right? Also along with that come like these norms and ideas. And so this part of the goal work is like, well, what does that look like for us? How do we create the environment where it is collaborative, where it's not already dictated, that you should already know how to show up, because people are new to this and they don't know who we are and they don't know what they don't know and they only know what they know. So
I'd love to like steer us back together. I'm just curious because we're halfway through the call. Like, what would we like to have by the end of this call? And knowing it's a work in progress, I just want to be able to, allow for the creative kind of genesis and then also kind of diverge, converge. Especially knowing a few folks in this call, including myself, like to have some tangible outcomes at the end of a call too.
I think seeing how this is all played out is like, we're talking about the invitation. We're talking about engaging people outside of the people who've drunk the Kool-Aid and bring them in, as well as how we interact inside of that. And something I might throw out there is that we are talking about concepts that are almost selling points themselves. Like break rules and dream. That by itself, you have a certain mindset of individuals that when they say that, they're like, I'm on board, myself included. And so part of the, well, how do we structure that invitation, like Dio was saying, is like, well, are these things that we want to put out there and say like, hey, you want to come be part of this ESHIP summit? What we're about is breaking rules and dreaming. Like, that's something that actually might be very valuable to have on there. And so not necessarily that it's meant to be conformative and restricting, but there is a point at which you have to say, well, I have to make an invitation, and part of that invitation is having words to be said. And so maybe the question is, do we take all of these rules of engagement and put them into our copy for that invitation if we're trying to create a standardized invitation, or should we do a subset? Maybe that would be a good place to start. Or is it some other more simplistic sets of values or something that we would want to engage people with? I don't know. But maybe that's a good place to start is, are these things that we think we would want to invite other people to engage with if they're interested in what ESHIP's doing?
That's a good question. So I will use that as a brief opportunity to give part of an update on the sort of a side project that a couple of us, Tiffany, Dia, and I are working on, sort of some drafts related to invitation language for, and it's not exactly like directly the invite for, say, ESHIP, for the ESHIP Summit, but it's really more of a proposal around how we might invite participation of delegations or participation of groups from different regions and communities. And we ended up breaking it into 3 different pieces. So one is like the text of an invitation itself. And to some extent, the way that I look at that, and that's the one that we're creating a draft this week that we'll be able to share back out with the group. But the part that I'm focused on with that is really the value proposition, sort of the why it's important that we have different folks come from, from the community, different folks come from the community to participate. The other part, one of the other parts is sort of and Dia, I think you're working on this one. So is there a particular aspect of the piece that we wanted to give people something of a framework of, kind of some guidelines of the kinds of folks that folks should, or the kinds of things that people should consider when they're thinking about inviting other people from community. And it feels like some of this could be part of that, say, document, but I'm not sure. Dia, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
No, Eric, I was just going to second you on that. From whenever we started talking about this, I do see a correlation in not just like, the economic developer in your area, but also like maybe there's someone we haven't thought about, but they kind of fit this, the norms or rules of engagement, however we want to call it. And is there a way to kind of make that translation into the invitation?
And one thing I'm sort of mining our conversation right now for is, what are the pieces of this, say, the rules of engagement that we've got here, what we've discussed so far? What are the things that are, I don't know, sticky and kind of excite people in order to come together? A lot of what's going on in my head right now, and hopefully this will not be all of what I say right up, is kind of economic development boilerplate kind of stuff. It's all good. It's all, I think it means the right thing, but it's not particularly exciting. And you're reminding me, Marcus, like, break rules and dream is like, that's kind of we're not looking for just the folks who are already doing this as their practice and have been doing it for, 100 years. So I like the things that are in this that might excited different kind of participation so that we have innovators coming and participating and bringing that innovation, both sharing it nationally, but also bringing it back home.
Actually, I'm thinking, Eric, that a lot of the people that when you say practicing economic development, you mean practicing ecosystem building. Which one are you talking about practicing already? Economic development?
I think mostly economic development. So that's one of the audiences that's in my head,
Right.
is that set of people.
Yeah, and so I work with a lot of economic developers, love them, because they fund a lot of my programs, but a lot of them are not thinking the way we're thinking. A lot of them are thinking the traditional economic development. You go find a company, you get them to buy a plot of land and drop a business in, and they hire some people and they pay some taxes and woo, 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 we did a great job. That's not ecosystem building. That's just bringing in the elephants, right? If you don't have the grass and the water and the trees and all the things they need, right? Then they eventually move on to another part of the forest. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking maybe our primary audience may not be the people that have to unlearn the way they've their economic development training and relearn this. Is people who are new and looking to help define the future. I think we want people who want to define the future.
Christine, you want to share some of the
stuff?
The work that we've been doing, maybe?
Oh, which work? Which
about talking about the reframe, and it's not where it's not another role.
Oh, yeah.
It's
happy to share that. I think so. This is a little bit of some thinking. I think we've all many of us have been spending a lot of time in terms of what is ecosystem building as like work, and then a field, and what is ecosystem building as a role. And I think as Cecilia and I have been really in the work with a lot of these goal calls, one of the things that we've been seeing as a helpful reframe potentially is actually seeing ecosystem building and the role of it, not necessarily fitting underneath the economic development umbrella, but actually something that actually helps make sense of the whole field. So I've been in using layman's terms, been joking, if we train ecosystem builders, we're basically training people to be good humans. People who come into any situation with curiosity, openness, inquisitiveness to ask good questions and listen and to connect dots. And so a lot of the roles that we already see in economic development, whether it be the traditional economic developer, a VP of innovation, someone who sits in an accelerator incubator, all of them have ecosystem building as part of their role and function. It helps them do their job even better. And so the reframe is just thinking about, in terms of this role, it's actually not necessarily, we don't want to be prescriptive in terms of this is what an ecosystem builder does, but it's actually the approach in which it is. It's kind of like being kind, being curious, being inquisitive. And so I think some of these rules of engagement can actually kind of prime a little bit of that, if that's where you're kind of leading to, Cecilia, if you want to elaborate a little bit. But that's been some of the reframe that we've been exploring some of this work into, because I think when a lot of the tension that I've experienced, at least in coming into ESHIP, is that it's been explained to me that there's been this clash of economic developers or others not wanting to embrace ecosystem building. And for me, it's really odd. I'm like, what do you mean? If we're all in service of a more resilient economy or really supporting our communities and cities, why are we at tension for that? And so really being able to understand how each of us play a role, and the role of the ecosystem builder is to have really strong relationships with the economic development office, with the mayor's office, with the university, to really show that we're in service of this whole system being really healthy and in service of each other, so that we can support entrepreneurs, we can support each other, we can support the community. And so just reframing that a little bit, I'm curious how that might resonate, or how that might help inform the work that we're thinking about right now.
Yeah, I have to share with you that when Christine and I started in these roles, Christine kept asking, I'm really curious about these ecosystem builders. How do they come? How do they show up? What do they like? And I'm like, I don't know how to describe it, right? Because it's not like a job, we keep talking about this job description, and it's like, for a lot of us, it's the side hustle of whatever it is else you're doing. So we know plenty of people who are entrepreneur support organizers, right? They run co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, all kinds of programs, educators. And there are people that have that thing, and there are people who don't. And sometimes when you walk into the room, and maybe that's just my epiphany moment of when I walked into the ESHIP Summit and I started talking to people, there were people that I recognized who were like, these are my people. They talk in the same way. They geek out on the same things. We don't necessarily have to be doing the same role, but they do it with the kind of approach of somebody who comes with a sharing mindset and thinks about things holistically. And what we talk about is leadership skills or leadership traits of an ecosystem builder, right? So there are mayors that we've met at the Mayors Conference that kind of approach their work in that way. And so to me, it's become more of a mindset than anything else. The idea of creating a professional field of ecosystem builders is that you get recognized for that other thing that you do, and you get to do that in whatever sector, role, engagement. So Dia, she works under the economic development office, right, of the city of Ada. Katie works for Wake. And so Wake Forest is the system, and she's involved in educators, but she comes to it with the framework of, you know what, if we all work together, we could actually do this thing more robustly, or people would be able to thrive. And so it is. So in that framing, and I don't want to take it totally off course because it's still kind of a work in process, but the idea of saying that we're inviting you to approach the work, whatever work that you're doing, approach it with this other or with this added perspective, as opposed to welcome and become an ecosystem builder. Here's the box that looks like, right? So I don't know if that rule of engagement or that invitation becomes do the thing that you do more so, right? It's the do good well. And I actually have a thing that says that. So go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, the whole mindset thing and whatnot, because I think also in recent times we've been talking about how entrepreneurship is a mindset, and it's not like it gets applied beyond just building a business from scratch and whatnot. Like it's something that's bigger and broader. And I think in the same way, ecosystem building is a mindset that can get applied across different verticals and, you know, industries and whatnot. And I for sure can say that like there are just as many different people in different places in the ecosystem builder space that can be definitively said like, oh, they're an ecosystem builder, and it doesn't cross any specific work. And so my question is, maybe there is, just like in entrepreneurship, there are kind of categories in there where you've got like your Main Street versus your startup entrepreneur, and then you've got the general entrepreneurship mindset. In the same way, maybe there are you've got your economic development ecosystem builders, and then your like service provider oriented ecosystem builders, and then just the general mindset that gets applied to other places. Because to me, being an ecosystem builder is all about making those connections. It's about being the broader picture that's able to see where people play in together. And that's something that's a totally different thing than just a skill or like just a job. It's a skill, it's not a job. So I don't know, but I think that it might be the same way.
So Marcus, let me ask you just a little bit deeper. When you said making the connections, why are you making the connections? What draws you to do that? And why does it matter?
Because if the connection wasn't there, the person wouldn't be able to succeed. To me, it's like, it's obviously, it's about the success of the individuals. And I guess there are definitely people who don't lean that way. But the success of the individual is the success of the collective group, the community, the marketplace is then the success of everybody. But I think it does come back to like, why am I making the connection? It's about seeing two people who need each other, and will fundamentally have a harder job at life if they don't have that connection.
I love those Cecilia smiles. I think we could just kind of go back through and just capture a bunch of those kind of like, it's like she's got this Cheshire cat kind of like you're really onto something there, but I don't want to say it. I don't know. And I'll share
You muted yourself.
I have muted myself. I pressed the space bar. I hate it when I do that. Yeah, so, and I'm not sure if this is germane to our conversation now, so I'll try and share it quickly, which is, I think a lot of what, say, Startup Champions and some other groups have been focused on is the job of ecosystem builder. And I know there's been, maybe there's a couple dozen people who've gotten that job. I had that job for 18 months, and it's part of my current job, but I think sometimes the focus has been on a field that supports that as a job versus what I'm thinking more from what Cecilia and Marcus were just saying is, if this is a capability that you've got as a city planner, or you're with an incubator, or you're with one of these other kinds of organizations, that's sort of a false force multiplier for your community. And I kind of feel like that's much more powerful than we're going to give these 36 people or, 100 people these jobs. So I just thankful for the conversation.
Yeah, well, and to me, that's like the difference between a degree and a certification. A certification is not a job, or it shouldn't be. A certification is, oh, well, I'm a really bad one. Like, I'm Excel certified. You don't get a job doing Excel spreadsheets. It may be a very important part of your job, but your job is not make Excel spreadsheet. It's something beyond that. And I think it's maybe in the same way here, or like Scrum Master. That one is more of a job. It's kind of more inclusive. But obviously someone who has a Scrum Master certification might be doing something much more than just acting in that format. But again, I don't want you to get me wrong. I am all for trying to create a economically sustainable job position of ecosystem builder. And like a core tenet of what Axon's trying to do is that. We called it curators before we came here. But if you want to call it ecosystem builders, if you want to call it whatever some of the other people call it, like, sure, I think there is a place for an economically sustainable position for that. It's just a very complex system that supports that.
I'm curious to your point, Marcus, around you specifically trying to create a role. I've been thinking about this role. The reason why it's been so challenging to understand who funds it is because it's often a transitionary role. Like I describe it as like being like a gap filler. Because oftentimes if a good ecosystem builder is coming in, they're able to assess where the current city is or the community is, identify what gap is missing that might help accelerate everyone's work together. But then they'll transition in and out of that role. That role might shift because once they fill that gap, there's now an existing role for X, which is why I think in thinking about the job description, it's helpful to kind of like put it side by side along what the other existing roles might look like in a community, which then helps almost in some ways, which could be challenging, helps justify how everyone has to fund this role in some ways, because it actually is accelerating everyone's collective work together.
Yeah, I think the one thing that in my mind is a very key point is that we aren't a static system. And so as soon as we fill one gap, another one is made. And so if you're operating within static systems, then yes, an ecosystem builder should put themselves out of a job. That is like,
yes,
they've succeeded well.
1000%. Yes.
But we're not working in static systems. And so that's where I think it'll be in a continuously evolving system that requires continuously active participants in that role.
It's like someone who's continuously tending to the whole, right? Because everyone's working in their own lane. So as soon as an ecosystem builder identifies a gap, they kind of have to go deep into it to then follow through on it. And then so being able to kind of like continually lift up the head to figure out what does the whole system need right now, I think is an interesting way to justify the role or things like that.
Yeah, well, and another thing, which I don't want to go too much into my theories and whatnot, but like assuming that the human population stays the way it is and automation goes the way it does, the need for entrepreneur will continue to grow. And so if we assume a finite number of entrepreneurs, then the system itself will not need anyone to bring people into entrepreneurship. But assuming that we need to continue to grow the field of entrepreneurship and the number of entrepreneurs, then there will always need to be curators of those individuals' connection into the greater whole of entrepreneurship. And that is another place where I see ecosystem builder as a role fitting very, very necessarily. And that's something that we haven't been doing for the last several decades or millennia, or however you want to call it.
Yeah, because the numbers in entrepreneurs are going down because we're not fostering that. So Katie, I see you like you're smiling on and off and you're like, oh, okay. So how is this resonating or not resonating? Is there traction?
You know, I think this may be wrong, but I'm thinking of entrepreneurial ecosystem builders as a separate thing. And just because sometimes trying to connect the new thing you're trying to build into something that already exists gets very complicated. If we define that new thing as the new thing, people in what's already been built who resonate with that and connect will automatically kind of scooch over close to it. So when I think of entrepreneurship, ecosystem builders, I think of a different animal. Now, there may be some hybrid breeds out there in the traditional economic development environment, but not many, because they're not rewarded for doing this kind of work. The traditional economic developer who's out there trying to put kids through college and buy that boat with their job, they're getting measured by something other than what we're measuring here. A lot of what we're measuring here, you can't use a traditional, how many jobs created, how many taxes paid, how many square feet of space occupied that economic developers are measured on. So almost, in my opinion, y'all know I always have one, at least one, sometimes more. In my opinion, a traditional economic developer who embraces this is really doing it for emotional fulfillment reasons. I mean, they've got this in their heart, and sometimes it doesn't have a whole lot to do with what measurements they go to their boss and stakeholders with, the people who are paying their salaries, in my opinion.
Well, and it does, putting a number on that and paying $1 for that cheapen the value of that. That's Freakonomics is a huge piece about that. It's like, how do you change value, especially social value, and maybe the value of what we do is social driven, and putting an economic value on that changes everything.
Well, I think we have to look for indicators. So in pure economic development, they don't care what is indicated where. They want to know how many taxes paid. But I think in our work, we can look for indicators of movement, because this is really investment work. It's like planting seeds and plowing fields, and the pecan tree you plant today, may not bear any fruit for 5 years. So you have to, now you can tell I'm a preacher's kid, there's a bit of faith that comes into the work that we do. I don't care what organized religion you follow, but there's a bit of faith that comes into the work that we do. And because we put it out there and hope that it pays off down the road. You just keep planting and keep watering and keep, fertilizing and throw a little manure in there every now and then. And eventually something's going to grow, right?
That's the hope, right?
Manure is precious, by the way. I just paid $15 a bag for 2 big bags of chicken food. Stuff is like gold.
Oh.
One man's crap is another man's treasure.
That's true, literally. Although I think chicken crap is better than man's crap when it comes to growing vegetables.
I just wanted to add that I was just nodding my head at everything Katie was saying, because it's just real talk. I mean, we want more economic developers in this field, and things are changing. That's kind of the world I work in, but it's really hard at the end of the day sometimes to show those tangible measurements. And I'm glad that the work we're doing in ESHIP as well to find those measurements and data, because that is something that's going to be just really important as we try to show the value of to get more economic developers to do this work. So
that's great. I think that's a good note to end on. So the idea of, I know that you want to come out of it with something. The idea and the notion that to be collaborative and inclusive in how we approach the work is to figure out that all of these things need to resonate or figure out how to make the argument for. So really rallying around the goal 5 group and figuring out what are the KPIs that we can come up with in order to, because the work that we talk about, it's like, how do we validate or affirm that this is actually a thing? Like, we may all feel like this is a thing, but then they're going to say, well, show me something. And you're like, we're the mycelium, the invisible glue that holds all this together. I'm trying to put my inclusion hat on. I'm going to try to find another term for drinking the Kool-Aid, because it's really a crappy term, and we probably should not use it, because it was a horrific event that happened, that we got this. And then somebody said we should talk about drinking the champagne, but not everybody drinks alcohol, so that's not inclusive either.
It doesn't matter. I still say drink your champagne. You drink your own champagne versus eating your own dog food. I still say drink your own champagne. It could be like bubbles, whatever.
Okay, so I don't know. Christine's usually the one that comes out with, like, not killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It's
feeding 2 birds with 1 scone.
See, so there's a whole list of, yes, Marcus, welcome to my world.
Marcus is done. He's like, get out.
Anyway, thank you, because I think that this is definitely helping. This definitely helps with the goal 3 conversation that'll happen on Wednesday, about putting together a mission, vision, values. So all of this is important. You're all doing really important work, and we appreciate you. So I will look forward to the next time. And I'll keep talking on Slack, and we'll figure this out. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Really appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you all. It's great to see y'all.
Good to see you. Bye.